Andover in Hampshire, Britain's newest motor racing circuit, Thruxton was a wartime aerodrome. Whitley bombers flew from here to drop pamphlets over Germany. But now its perimeter track has been widened and resurfaced to form a 2.4 mile circuit, a circuit which the top-line drivers extol as one of the best in Britain. Certainly an excellent replacement for the now defunct Goodwood. Aptly enough, many of its corners have been named after great names like Cobb, Campbell, Seagrave, Allard, great names who drove great cars. Wheelbase has got here today a selection of those cars, ranging from 1899 to the present day. Cars which typify those of each era. And leading the field in this parade, the Lotus of 1968, complying with the new Formula Ford, typifying not only the current trend for diminutive size with the engine behind the driver, but also an attempt to go back to a degree of amateurism for those who haven't a big bank balance. And there the Vanwall which managed to secure for Britain the World Manufacturers' Cup in 1958, with Tony Brooks now at the wheel. He and Sterling Moss were their prime drivers, the checkered flag out to mark them crossing the line there. A 1956 Connaught, 2.5 litres unsupercharged, 4 cylinders, and it was in a Connaught that Tony Brooks won the Syracuse Grand Prix in 1955, the first British car and driver to win a Formula One race since Seagrave in a Sunbeam won the French Grand Prix in 1923. And an ERA, the car which held British fortunes for so many years in the immediate post-war years, 1.5 litres supercharged, and after the war it was revived and used again, although then very old, in many Grand Prix races. And here a Mercedes, the Mercedes which in 1938 was dominant, together with Auto Union, in the huge effort which the Nazi government made to sponsor motor racing and bring glory to Germany. A 1926 Bugatti Type 35, 2.3 litres supercharged, maximum speed about 130 miles an hour, a make and model which won more races for France in between the world wars than any other make at all. A 1918 Straker-Squire, 4 litres, 6 cylinders, a typical Brooklands car designed by Roy Fedden in Bristol, and it lapped Brooklands at 103.1 miles an hour. The 1914 Sunbeam, 3.3 litres, won the Tourist Trophy race in the Isle of Man in 1914, maximum speed about 91 miles an hour, an advanced engine with twin overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder. The Napier, 1908, the English racing car of the first decade of the century. This is a work sprint car, 11.6 litres, 6 cylinders, maximum speed about 90 to 100. The 1908 Itala, a rare surviving example of this Italian model which ran in the 1908 French Grand Prix, 12 litres, 4 cylinders, 115 brake horsepower, and it lapped Brooklands in 1910 at 101.8 miles an hour. A 1927 Delage from France, the Delage which even won races 10 years after it was made, with Dick Seaman at the wheel in 1937. That's the Delage there now, which was one of the lowest cars of its time, much lower than the ERA which we see just behind it.
So welcome to Thruxton on this diabolical day, and here we've assembled cars representative of Grand Prix racing over a period of 70 years, going back in 10-year intervals. 68, 58, 48, 38, 28. Inevitably, sometimes we'll hit on a period when Grand Prix racing was in the doldrums, but we've got cars representative of the racing that was going on at that time, right back to 1898 with the Cannstatt Daimler, one of the first cars built not just to replace the horse, but with the idea of going faster than anybody else. The first motor race, I suppose, 1894, the Paris-Rouen, won by a steam car with Count de Dion driving at the magnificent speed of 11.6 miles an hour. But very soon petrol took over, and in the short space of 22 years, up to the outbreak of the First World War, we had fantastic progress. The great monsters like this Itala here, 12 litres, great things 17 litres came and went in the great races from city to city, which finished with the tragic Paris-Madrid of 1903, followed by the Gordon Bennett's and the Ardennes circuit, and French Grand Prix at Le Mans too, but on a different circuit, much longer and faster than the one we know nowadays. Things developing so fast that by the time the First World War broke out, we had cars weighing no more than the present-day family saloon, doing about 110 miles an hour with 115 horsepower.
The cars which raced before World War I relied mainly on brute force. Little heed was paid to overall weight and no heed to streamlining. Their engines were low revving, their brakes almost an afterthought for the rear wheels only. Races in those days were longer and the road surfaces appalling. It was a tough era. An era which was heralded by the 1899 Cannstatt Daimler. That's from Germany. Designed by Paul Daimler, this was probably the first attempt to design a car with racing as opposed to touring in view. The engine is a 4-cylinder 5-litre, developing 24 bhp at 800 rpm. Once the property of the famous Count Elliot Zaborski, Francis Hutton Stott bought this car in 1951, before when its engine had been used to drive a sawmill, and before then it also had only 2 owners since new. The first car ever to have a honeycomb radiator and a gate gear change. The total weight is 2.5 tons, so the power-to-weight ratio is quite a bit less than a modern motor scooter. The 1908 Itala is a different kettle of fish. 10 years younger than the Daimler, it was lighter and more powerful. John T. Williams, now with the car, is co-owner with Sam Clutton, and in their hands it's been racing in Britain regularly since 1937. Its 4-cylinder 12-litre engine develops 115 bhp at 1700 rpm, featuring overhead inlet valves and side exhausts. Weighing 3,700 weights, it does 60 mph in top at 1000 rpm. The radiator has 10,250 tubes and holds about 12 gallons of water, and nowadays its beaded edge tyres have to be made specially at a cost of about £25 each. Whereas the Cannstatt Daimler had chain drive, the Itala has a shaft drive. Maximum speed was around 100, with only rear wheel brakes to stop it. Ronald Barker's 1908 Napier personifies its era in size and appearance, with the driver and mechanic perched up high and exposed to the elements. 11.6 litres, 6 cylinders, a more refined car than the Itala, based on the Napier touring cars, which were proclaimed as noiseless and smokeless. Maximum speed is now about 90, but when tuned for sprints, about 100. Sir Francis Samuelson now owns this 1914 Sunbeam, which is believed to be the actual car which K. Lee Guinness drove to victory in the Tourist Trophy in the Isle of Man that year. The maximum speed is 91, and its 4-cylinder 3.3-litre twin overhead cam engine develops 94 bhp at 3,000 revs per minute, high revving for those days. Some people say that the 1914 Sunbeam was a copy of the 1913 French Peugeot. Only partly true, because its designer, Monsieur Henri, was employed by Sunbeam, having previously worked for Peugeot. Sir Francis Samuelson has owned this car now for 19 years, and he himself started racing in 1911, sometimes having his wife with him as riding mechanic. Sir Francis still races today, 57 after he started.
Ronnie Barker, apart from being the president of the Vintage Sports Car Club, you're a monster owner, or I suppose I should say an owner of a monster.
Well, that sounds a bit kind, though.
Would you tell us what it's like to drive these cars?
Well, I think a lot of people have illusions about them, that they were immensely difficult and heavy and that sort of thing, and very difficult with bad road holding and on their very high pressure narrow section tyres. I think that the difficulties that the drivers had in those days weren't with the handling of the cars, but with the conditions. They drove mostly on very dusty roads. On one occasion the French used some special chemical compound to lay the dust, and this worked like acid in the driver's eyes and made things even worse. And they had frequent tyre troubles, of course, and the driver and his mechanic had to change the tyres with their bare hands, levers and things. And this was the really tough side of it, and the fact that they couldn't see to overtake because of the dust. But from my fairly narrow experience of driving this sort of a car, I've driven my Napier a lot, I've driven the big Itala once, and several other cars of this type, and the handling of most of them was simply magnificent. Round sort of racing courses like this, for instance, one uses almost the technique that one would in a racing Mini. You set your car up for a corner by sort of nosing into it, and then you use the power to carry the tail round, and you can four-wheel drift them and do everything you like. They're beautifully balanced.
What really stopped the monsters? We can see from the Sunbeam behind you that by the time the Great War came, the monster was beginning to disappear. What brought this about?
The monster was really killed by three people who designed a Peugeot. The one whose name is usually most closely attached to it is the Swiss designer Ernst Henry. And they designed the first of the twin overhead camshaft high efficiency engines. I think this is in 1912 that Peugeot's first produced a car with an engine size of only 7.5 litres, and within 2 years they'd reduced it to 3 litres, and immediately it was a success. And the big monsters simply hadn't got the handling and the lightweight controls of these newer cars and high-efficiency engines.
The years between the two world wars saw a complete revolution in the thinking behind racing car design. As this group of cars spanning that era show, the whole concept of the car changed. They became lower, lighter, narrower and more streamlined. Brakes and road holding improved enormously. First, we see the 1918 Straker-Squire, owned now by Philip Mann. Aircraft designer Roy Fedden thought this one up, and its 4-litre engine could almost have come out of a World War I aircraft with its 6 separate cylinders and open valve gear. This is the only surviving car of the 3 experimental ones which were made. It was essentially a Brooklands track car, meant more for maximum speed than for cornering on twisting road circuits. Bunty Kensington Wire had a lot of success with this Straker-Squire in 1920 and 21 when it lapped Brooklands at 103.1 miles an hour. In 1925, it no longer became necessary to carry a riding mechanic in races, and yet, despite this relaxation, it was some years before designers forsook the 2-seater body. Monsieur Ettore Bugatti clung on to the 2-seater shape for longer than most, but his Type 35 Bugatti, seen here in its 1926 form, was one of the most successful make and model of cars in the late 1920s. Great names like Louis Chiron, Achille Bazzi, Williams, Dreyfus and Étincelin drove these 2.3-litre single overhead camshaft supercharged cars to countless victories. About 1,000 Type 35 Bugattis were built, and they sold then for about £1,200 each. A good example is worth more than that today. Bernard Kane owns this one, and he tells me that it'll still do 130 miles an hour using dope fuel, which it drinks at the rate of 3 miles per gallon. Distinctive features are its aluminium spoked wheels with the brake drums built into them, its hollow beam front axle with extremely hard springing, and its cable brakes. Ettore is reputed to have said, "I make my cars to go, not to stop." And go they did, with 160 bhp produced at 5,500 RPM with characteristic Bugatti piercing screams. Also from France came the Delage, a car which on several occasions defeated the Bugattis, usually in the hands of Benoit. The 1927 Delage, and this example is now owned by Mike Bradley, has a 1.5-litre twin overhead cam straight 8 engine developing about 170 bhp. Its profile was lower than that of any other car racing up to then. And yet, although riding mechanics were a thing of the past, the Delage still kept a temporary shielded space for a passenger if necessary. Nevertheless, the car was relatively light, about 1,600 hundredweight, and its superb advanced design was evidenced by the fact that Dick Seaman was winning races with one of these models as late as 1937. During the 1930s, the Nazi government, mindful of the prestige which accompanies victories in Grand Prix races, poured a veritable fortune into the German firms of Auto Union and Mercedes. A new concept of racing car emerged, with a semi-streamlined single-seater body, light in weight, low in shape, featuring independent front suspension and a de Dion rear axle. The Mercedes 163, together with the revolutionary rear-engined Auto Unions, dominated Grand Prix racing in 1938 and 39. The Mercedes had a 3-litre V12 supercharged engine, developing 420 bhp, able to propel it at 195 miles an hour. It did only 3 mpg, so it had to carry no less than 88 gallons of special dope fuel. As its tanks emptied, its overall weight would drop by 500 weight, and this considerably affected its handling, so the driver had a control in his cockpit to adjust the rear shock absorbers. When World War II started, it was Germany that was all-conquering on the world's racing circuits. The days of Brooklands were by then nearly over.
Philip Mann, as the owner of one of the few surviving Brooklands cars, what about Brooklands?
Well, Michael, Brooklands was really a splendid place. It was an occasion to go there. The track was built, I suppose, 1908 by a Mr. Lock King as a private venture and consisted of a giant concrete saucer with banked sides around which you head as fast as you possibly could and tried not to go over the top. Unfortunately, this used to happen on occasion with dire results to the machine and the driver. I suppose when they built it, they had no precedent to work upon at all, so they modeled it on a racetrack. And you had the paddock, and you had the bookies, and you had the members' enclosure, and the whole thing was a racing occasion. The drivers then, I suppose for the most part, were really enthusiastic amateurs. And in fact, before the 14 War, they used to wear racing silks, exactly the same as a racetrack with jockeys. Really splendid.
While we were doing all this in England, the rest of Europe was going in a quite different direction, wasn't it?
Well, yes, the big manufacturers had not really got themselves interested in Grand Prix racing. There are exceptions, of course. One thinks immediately of Fiat, who were prominent, Sunbeam in this country, who were prominent. But basically, the big money was not yet being poured into it. And the enthusiastic amateur, again with a private income, could buy a car like the Type 35 Bugatti and race it very successfully indeed.
When World War II was over, motor racing slowly returned, using mainly old aerodrome circuits. At first, inevitably, the cars were pre-war leftovers, like for instance Britain's ERA, a 1.5-litre supercharged car which did well in the late 1930s in the voiturette races, which were curtain raisers to the Grand Prix events. But now the formula had changed from 3 litres supercharged to 1.5 litres supercharged, and so the ERAs were given a new lease of life. This particular car, owned now by Bill Morris and David Kurgan, used to be driven by Earl Howe, Raymond Mays and Humphrey Cook for the Works ERA team. It was then bought by Prince Chula of Siam for his cousin Beera to drive. Called Hanuman, Beera crashed it in 1939 at Reims, but by the end of the war it had been rebuilt and the little Siamese prince won the Ulster Trophy with Hanuman II in 1946. It then went to South Africa for 12 years, but its present owners bought it, restored it and now race it regularly in the Vintage Sports Car Club meetings. This 1936 ERA typifies all that is best in that splendid spirit of comradeship and enthusiasm which exists in this club. The BRM, first raced in 1950, was a bold and ambitious venture. It was a committee-built car with a large number of firms from the British motor industry having a hand in it. Perhaps partly because of this and partly because its design was extremely complicated, it never attained the successes that were hoped for. Its 1.5-litre supercharged engine had no less than 16 cylinders in V formation. That means each cylinder was a mere 93 cc in capacity, like 2 rows of overgrown egg cups. If all 16 of them were working, then they'd collectively produced 480 bhp. Theoretically, the V16 BRM was a world beater. In practice, it wasn't. In 1954, Mercedes returned to Grand Prix racing. By then, the formula had changed and the limit was now 2.5 litres unsupercharged or 750cc supercharged. All designers opted for the bigger, unblown engines, including Mercedes with their W196 model, a straight 8 fitted either with a body like this one or else a streamlined version for the faster circuits. In 1954 and 55, Fangio and Moss won innumerable races in these 2.5-litre Mercs, with their fuel injection engines developing close on 300 bhp. After those 2 years of victory, Mercedes withdrew into their oyster shell again and haven't officially raced again since. Meanwhile, there was at least one British firm who was striving to beat the opposition. Connaught, a small concern in Surrey, were using Alta 2.5-litre engines. In 1955, a Connaught won the Syracuse Grand Prix with Tony Brooks driving, the first time for 32 years that a British driver had won an international Grand Prix in a British car. This 1956 Connaught is one of the last ones to be made, and it was driven by such men as the late Archie Scott Brown. With carburetors, it develops 240 bhp, but when fitted with fuel injections, it could scrape up another 10 bhp. Top speed, about 155. now owned by Alan McKechnie, this Connaught, like other Connaughts, features a pre-selected gearbox. When Mercedes withdrew at the end of 1955, the main contenders for Grand Prix honours were all Italian: Lancia, Ferrari and Maserati. And of these, the Maserati 250F was probably the best known single model. Its six-cylinder, 2.5-litre engine pushed out 260 brake horsepower, and it was in one of these cars that Fangio won his 5th World Championship in 1957, including that epic drive when he passed 2 Ferraris on the last lap at Nürburgring to win the German Grand Prix. A patriotic Englishman called Tony van der Velde was determined to break this long run of success by German and Italian cars. So he built the Vanwall, using the know-how of Colin Chapman for its chassis, and in general basing its engine on 4 racing Norton motorcycle cylinders. The result was 310 bhp on nitromethane fuel, and only a little less when in 1958 the regulations insisted on pump petrol. With Sterling Moss, Tony Brooks and Stuart Lewis Evans to drive them, and that's Tony Brooks at the wheel of it at the moment, Vanwalls emerged the most successful Grand Prix car in 1958, and so they retired with Britain riding the waves. In the last decade, there's been a bigger change than ever in the layout of a racing car. Pioneered by John Cooper of Cooper Cars, the engine has moved to behind the driver, and the whole vehicle has become incredibly low and slim. At this moment, the Formula One cars are earning their keep in Monte Carlo in readiness for next Sunday's Monaco Grand Prix. But we have here a Formula 2 Lotus and also a Lotus conforming to the newest formula, Formula Ford. In concept, they're both the slipper or roller skate, call it what you will, the slim cigar shape that's been adopted by every modern racing car. But Formula Ford offers another aspect. It's an attempt to offer the amateur a cheap form of motor racing. Yet another attempt to provide motor racing on a shoestring devoid of commercial interests. A reversion to the starting grids of 70 years ago, perhaps.
Looking down this line from behind you, you've driven a fair proportion of these cars up to, you've tried the modern single-seaters.
Yes, I have. I drove a Brabham about 12 months ago, and it was terribly impressive, the way it cornered geometrically, but I didn't honestly find it as much fun as the cars I was driving, I suppose, in the late 50s anyway, the front-engine cars.
Why would you say they were more fun?
Well, I think they took more driving in the sense that you were constantly working at it. It's very difficult to judge the limit of adhesion on any type of car, and certainly the modern cars are extremely difficult to assess when you're about to break away. But getting up to the limit, I found with the front-engine cars, was far more satisfying. You felt that you were fighting even to get up to the limit, let alone to keep it on the limit without overstepping the mark.
Just 10, in fact 11 years ago, you had a season when you were driving both types, weren't you? The best of the old front-engine Formula and the first of the rear-engine Formula.
Yes, that was in 1957. I was driving Rob Walker's 2-litre Cooper, and I think we were about the first team to explore the full potential of the Cooper car as a potential Grand Prix winner. And the same year, of course, I was driving the Vanwall, so I had a very good example there of the difference. And the Vanwall was really hard work, you know, and I used to get out of the Vanwall in the Cooper and almost go to sleep in the wheel, but not to be taken too literally, but it really was so much easier.
Was it quite clear to you then that it was all over with the front-engine cars?
Yes, it was, but quite a few of the staunch conservatives in motor racing wouldn't see the light, and of course they did persevere with front-engine cars, one of whom was Ferrari, with whom I drove in 1959, and of course on other than the fast medium-speed circuits they were completely outclassed.
Of course there was a lot of investment still then, money invested in front-engine cars.
Yes, but I think it was rather a question of conservatism, that they wouldn't face the fact that these little Minnie Mouse cars, as they were thought at that time, had really come and made the £10,000 front-engine models look absolutely ridiculous.
In Ireland, you have the reputation of being the last of the playboys in motor racing, or at least the last man who went motor racing for fun. Do you think the fun's gone out of it now?
From my point of view, it certainly has. I think it's just one of those things. You've got to be much more dedicated to motor racing in its entirety than I was prepared to be. You know, there are lots of other things I like doing in life. I won't go into them at the moment, but motor racing wasn't you know, my whole life, and I think nowadays one has to be completely dedicated to it, and from my point of view this would certainly take most of the fun out of it.
You had a lot of experience of it in its latest phase, when concentrating entirely on cars with the engines behind the driver.
Yeah.
What did you think? Was it obvious to you that this was going to be the formula as soon as it arrived?
Well, I think, you know, I would much rather have been racing in the era that Tony Brooks is talking about. The cars were much more exciting, they looked more exciting, and I'm sure they were a great deal more fun to drive. When Moss won the Argentinian Grand Prix with the little Cooper, and that really rang the death knell of the bigger front-engine cars, and this was really the start of the changing scene in motor racing, with very small specialist car builders like Cooper and Lotus building these small racing cars, and they were doing it on a shoestring. They didn't have great amounts of money behind them, and of course they were having to make their motor racing pay. And this, I think, was the start of the changing scene, and you know, that has grown up to what we know now.
So that the specialists, and particularly the British specialists, have not only changed the whole design of the car, they've changed the nature of the sport.
I think so, yes.
Do you think
by their very existence, you know, and the way they exist.
For better or for worse?
Well, that's jolly difficult to say. And the cars are going faster, and they work better. They go around corners better and faster, and so forth. To my way of thinking, the spectator doesn't get so much out of it. There isn't so much to watch. There isn't the tails breaking away and wheels spinning in clouds of blue smoke and noise.
You can't even see the man at work.
No, you can't see. I mean, I can remember seeing Gonzalez going round Silverstone, and I mean, he was on the grass most of the time. He didn't seem to like using the track, and his arms were all going like this, and you know, people had actually got something to watch. You know, it was great fun to watch, and he sort of hung out over the sides of the cockpit. You know, so I think it. You know, I think the older form of motor racing was more spectacular.
So we end up with the earliest to the latest, and in the middle a representative of the great period in the 1930s when motor racing was a spectacle such as we've never seen before or since, coming right up to the present day. Motor racing has been controlled by various formulae, weight, engine size, and also fuel consumption, and it's passed through phases: national prestige, publicity for car manufacturers, and now it's become a highly professional and commercial operation, commercial reflected in the current controversy over whether the car should carry advertising or not. But there it is, it attracts more spectators on more circuits with more cars and more drivers than ever before in history, and although it's extremely expensive right at the top, it is also possible for people to break in with the new inexpensive single-seaters like this in a way that they never could at any other time in history. And if you want to know why British drivers and British tyres are the best in the wet, we can tell you today it's because they get more practice. Good night.